Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research and the Professor of Cultural Studies at Flinders University. And I'm talking with Steve Redhead, who is also the Professor of Cultural Studies at Flinders University and who I know via an accident of marriage. But we've got a rather special topic to talk about today. Yes, it's about a very special book that's being published, but more significantly, it provides a new model, a new way of thinking about writing, a new way of thinking about doing research. So we thought we would catalogue this process to help guys and gals out there who are moving into article publishing, but also book publishing for our new digital environment. So hello, Steve.
Hello, Tom.
And look, we've got fantastic news for people that have heard our podcasts over the last 2-3 years. They know we've been using the phrase theoretical times. That was a very big phrase for you that you've been branding up in your research. But we've got great news in that the book Theoretical Times has just been accepted by a publisher. So have you got in your head now the blurb about what Theoretical Times actually is? What is the book about?
Yes, Theoretical Times is my phrase in many ways for the post-crash condition that we live in after 2007-8. And I know that's a long time ago, but actually we're still in that post-crash condition. Theoretical Times is a book which builds on my We Have Never Been Postmodern Theory at the Speed of Light book, which I wrote in 2011-12. Came out as a book in 2011 and then an e-book in 2012. And it builds on that partly because I'm looking at very specific conditions of what I call theory, contemporary critical theory, the history of theory with a big T, right across the disciplines, post-disciplinary theory. And I'm looking particularly at 4 theorists, Alain Badiou, Slavoj Žižek, Jean Baudrillard and Paul Virilio. And in the case of the first 2 theorists, the work that's been generated out of their own recent work is called transcendental materialism. And I think that's a perspective which goes across the disciplines, from neuroscience to sociology of law to cultural studies.
Nice. And
can be applied in those disciplines, but is also post-disciplinary. And it fits the politics and culture of today, of what I call theoretical times. But the other thing about the book is that it actually tries to capture the contradictions of theory today. It's not that theory and theorists haven't existed in the past, but I think they're at a new high globally. And I think that's partly because of what Baudrillard called hyperreality. The theorists themselves, including Baudrillard, have become part of this hyperreal condition. And it is contradictory because you've got mature theorists, mature theory, 40, 50, 60 years of theory, which can be applied across the disciplines. But actually, that is trivialized and globalized in our digital, hyper-real culture. And I think it's that contradiction that makes Theoretical Times interesting.
I agree, and also I think it is time to bring sexy back. It is time to bring theory back, because I know conversations I have with our PhD students at Flinders, and they're often quite uncomfortable conversations, wonderful viewers, whereby they come in and I say, oh look, have you thought about this theorist? And they went, oh, theory. I hadn't really thought about using theory. And then I sort of take a breath, and my next question is often, so if you're not developing a theory and you're not using theory, what do you actually think that you're doing? Question mark. And of course the answer is often, oh look, I've done a study and I'm producing facts, not realising that positivism and empiricism is also a theory. So the necessity to bring capital T theory back, this is theory that we are doing now without apologies, I think is quite significant. So the time is great. But what I'm really impressed by, and I'm really impressed with, is the publisher that's gone for this book. Now, this is significant for a lot of the guys and gals out there looking for publishers. Tell us about the publisher.
Yes, I was approached by Emerald Publishing about this book, and I've signed the book to that publisher. Emerald are really interesting because they were started actually in Bingley, Yorkshire. That's where they're based,
Wow.
but they are a global publisher. About 40 years ago by an academic, and they've risen to producing lots and lots of journals, lots of books, lots of book series. But they've revamped themselves, interestingly, quite recently. So quite a few people were hired from Palgrave, for example, including my own editor, Philippa Grand, to work and to regenerate Emerald. And that's quite interesting. I think that a global publisher is now taking advantage of all sorts of aspects of digitalisation of ebooks and the new conditions in this post-crash cultural condition of a world that we live in.
I've been very impressed by them, and you know, publishers, most of us have horror stories with publishers. By the age, you know, we're both dinosaurs, we're both close to death, and we have war stories about publishers. And when you find a good one, I think it is really important to share those stories for colleagues, because they're trying to do something new, innovative, edgy, and they're not frightened about ideas, and they understand the global intellectual market very well, I think.
They do, and I think it's interesting. I was approached originally, before I actually signed the book to them, as a book proposal reviewer for a series which is now up and running, called Alternativity and Marginalisation, which I thought was really interesting anyway. But the first book in that series is a book on the New Goths, and again, a really much needed book. But actually, that shows what innovation is in a publisher. And I was really interested in that, and that's how we got to discussing the possibility of this innovative book getting signed. And then, indeed, Theoretical Times is signed, and it'll come out next year.
This year?
End of 2017.
We're speaking in January 2017, so we're still clicking over time, but this is the book you're literally writing every day now. But we're talking about the end point of that book appearing later on in 2017. I want to go back a little bit to the origins of this book, because in meta-analytical terms, this is the bit of the story that interests me the most. This book had its origin in a series of podcasts that we did 2 years ago,
yes.
Almost to the day actually, in the sort of Christmas break in academic life. 2 years ago, we recorded, I think, 8, maybe even
12
more.
actually.
12.
Which is still available. 12
podcasts. So if you go to Tara Brabazon podcast, you'll see the 12, because they are called Theoretical Times, Claustropolitanism, Theoretical Times, Frilio, Theoretical Times, on we go. So they're all there, and we literally did about one a day, one every couple of days, to sort of sketch out the field. And I think we were reflective at the time that let me push him and see if these topics have legs, if these topics have some weight to be able to be published into a book. I think we did think at the time it was going to be a book.
Yeah.
But tell us about the podcasts and then the writing of a book. Maybe there's a bigger point you want to make about social media there, but the role of talking through the argument in some depth to then have it become a book.
Yeah, I think certainly for me this was a different strategy. What the podcasts, a dozen podcasts actually on Theoretical Times about 18 months ago, actually was supposed to be doing was providing a bridge between the book that I wrote, We Have Never Been Postmodern, Theory at the Speed of Light, and this new project. And it certainly was envisaged as a book project at that time, but it was spilling over into International Journal of Baudrillard Studies, International Journal of Zizek Studies, open access material, which I was extremely committed to, and I still am. And I think the podcast basically made me really work at a particular thread of the book, that which theorists were going to be chosen and why, which concepts, which I was already developing and We Have Never Been Postmodern, like claustropolitanism, claustropolitan sociology, bunker anthropology, which I use in that book, and then how those things became part of the new book, how they got caught up in the threads of the new book. And I found doing the podcast extremely hard. I was perhaps shutting off some of the avenues. That's one of the things that the podcast did, and I had a lot of really good feedback. I put them on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and academia.edu and so on. And I got really lots of incredibly critical but positive response. And I changed things as I was going along in the writing, because I've written about 40,000 words of the book now. A lot of that was really helpful. Also, the Open Access Journal articles that I published out of this material which also referred to the podcast, in fact.
Yeah.
And then I revamped my website, Redhead.zone, and I had a Theoretical Times blog. First time I'd ever done any kind of blog. I was always a bit sceptical, I must admit, about the value of these things, but it was a terrific help. Not only getting me into the depths of the thing, but also it was a way of writing a new book. And there are 25 blog posts on that Theoretical Times website, that's Redhead.zone, and actually they have been refashioned into parts of chapters of the book. But again, I got tremendous positive and critical feedback from people as a result of those blog posts, and I feel that it's a better book already as a result of that. So I've had a lot of dialogue, a lot of feedback, a lot of critical thinking of my own, which has been based on what people have said.
Yeah, so therefore, would you want to offer a bigger or more generalised comment or advice to people about how social media is transforming book publishing? Because it's a lovely example of old and new media in a very interesting discursive dance. So have you found it productive in terms of the speed of the response?
Yes, I have. I mean, very often, because we're living in Australia, I'm getting feedback as I get up in a morning, which has been written overnight, say on Twitter or emails as a result of the tweets and so on. I felt it a 24/7 thing, whereas at one time I used to just write in packages. Now I've felt, almost in real time, a global response to the work, and the book is about the global response to Theoretical Times, so it's actually the content of the work.
And can I also state too, the publishers were very, very eager and satisfied with signing you very quickly, really, for this book, and one of the rationales for that was that they knew it would sell because they'd seen the trajectory and the arc of social media and the interest in this book via those avenues.
Yes, and they, again, a good example of a revamped publisher that's innovative and far-sighted. They were particularly concerned in the book proposal that I actually eventually produced for them, for me to show that I had got a social media presence, a global media presence, and our podcasts, which people don't know, and have tens of thousands of downloads all over the world. And have had really for the last 6 or 7 years.
And a big hi to everybody that does download them. We adore you. We thank you for your support. And it's been day after day, month after month, year after year, with a cumulative build of interest.
Absolutely, and we really appreciate that. But also, I think people in the media industry, book industry, aren't necessarily as switched on to that as they should be. I think Emerald are, and they're part of that. In many ways anyway, they're on Twitter and Facebook and so on. But I think the scale of what has been downloaded, for example, isn't really quite understood. For example, the University of Trumpland podcast that we did has been downloaded way over 100,000 times. But the interesting thing about that is that was on the themes of the Theoretical Times book, as you and I understood it, in our response to the Trump victory. So I think there's some really interesting things going on in social media land which haven't been caught up on by traditional academia, by traditional book publishing and so on. I really think we've ripped up the old lessons. We've got to learn them anew. I'm certainly learning them anew.
Fantastic. Nearly to the end of this vlog, I'm going to ask you the tough question, and again, I don't know the answer to this one, but in your head, as you are writing the second half of this book, who is your reader? Who is your audience for Theoretical Times?
Yes, I think that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I had to deal with it in the book proposal, and I tried to deal with it to some extent in terms of my knowledge of the social media audience. I mean, I certainly, as I've developed my academic career, started to write for what I think is a hybrid. And that's why the globalised Theoretical Times is interesting, so that someone like Zizek or Badia, for example, if they go to Melbourne or Seoul in South Korea for an event, they have academic audiences, but they also have way beyond that.
Yeah.
And I think I'm trying to write for the hybrid audience there. And I know people say, oh, I'm writing for an academic audience and then a non-academic audience. But I think that is changing. The very point about theoretical times in hyperreality is that you're not just simply writing for students and staff in a particular discipline, which you would usually say in an academic book proposal. This is different, partly because the content of the book is about how things have changed out there. In anti-intellectual times, we've got a parallel universe of theoretical times, of in fact a huge interest in the politics and culture of contemporary theory as something that is really important, really interesting, on a scale that we've not known before, right across countries, right across disciplines. Yeah. That's what Theoretical Times is about. So in a sense, I've got a hunch about that audience. I just hope I'm right.
Look, I think you are right, because the Trump victory and the Brexit were so startling, so shocking. You know, it was a fracture in common sense. It was a complete fracturing of here is the evidence and here is the outcome. It disconnected, you know, the Enlightenment project, basically. So therefore there's a bunch of us wandering around aimlessly going, still stunned, how could this have happened? And so in some ways I believe Theoretical Times addresses how it could have happened and how perhaps we prevent it from happening again. Yeah,
very much so. It is certainly about the way in which there has been a fracture of neoliberalism, of digitisation, of globalisation, and what those things mean and may mean for the future.
That's right. So to finish off, so we're in January 2017, and Happy New Year to everybody who's watching this. When is this book coming out? Do you have a month?
It will come out likely in November of 2017. That's later this year.
Well, Steve, congratulations on it. I feel like we've been living with this project for 2 years, and all your books have been important and interesting and timely. But this one, I believe, will be the book of the decade, and I do believe this will be the book that will transform the humanities and the role of humanities thinking in higher education and beyond. So congratulations, Stephen. Let's enjoy the final bit of writing.
Keep your fingers crossed.